It's late June 1940. France has fallen. Britain stands alone, its army evacuated from Dunkirk without equipment. Nazi Germany controls Western Europe from Norway to the Spanish border, and Mussolini's Italy is poised to strike. Italy controls the central Mediterranean with the fourth largest navy in the world. 500,000 troops occupy Libya and East Africa. Across the border in Egypt, 36,000 British troops guard the Suez Canal, Britain's lifeline to India and the Eastern Empire. Malta, the island fortress blocking Axis supply lines, can be isolated and starved. The Mediterranean could become an Axis lake. But that's not what happened. Instead of conquering Egypt, Italy suffers humiliating defeats in both Greece and North Africa. Instead of dominating the Mediterranean, the Italian navy hides in port after a single British raid. Germany has to bail out its ally again and again, diverting resources and delaying critical operations. Here's what would have happened if Italy had been competent, and why it still wouldn't have mattered. If you want to understand how strategic incompetence shapes history and what happens when regimes prioritize loyalty over ability, hit subscribe. To understand what a competent Italy would look like, we need to see what actually went wrong. And the failures were catastrophic. September 1940. Italy has 250,000 troops in Libya. 150,000 of them are in Marshal Graziani's 10th Army, lined up along the Egyptian border. Across that border, the British have 36,000 men. 4-1 advantage. Mussolini orders the invasion of Egypt. Graziani advances 60 miles, then stops. He builds a chain of fortified camps in the desert and waits. For 3 months, nothing happens. Then in December, the British counterattack with just 30,000 men. What follows is one of the most lopsided defeats in military history. The British destroy 10 Italian divisions, capture 130,000 prisoners, and push the Italians 500 miles back across Libya, almost to Tripoli. Germany has to send Erwin Rommel and the Afrika Korps just to prevent total Italian collapse in North Africa. But North Africa wasn't the only disaster. Late October 1940. Mussolini is jealous of Hitler's conquests. He wants his own victory to prove Italy doesn't need German help. So without telling Hitler, he invades Greece from Albania. He assumes the Greeks will collapse immediately. Instead, the Greeks counterattack and push the Italians back into the Albanian mountains in the middle of winter, without proper boots, winter clothing, or adequate supplies. The humiliation is total. Germany has to invade Yugoslavia and Greece the following spring just to save Italy from complete defeat. This intervention, combined with a late spring thaw that floods Eastern Europe's rivers, delays the invasion of the Soviet Union by crucial weeks. And then there was the Navy. On paper, the Italian Navy looked formidable. 6 battleships, 7 heavy cruisers, outnumbering the British Mediterranean fleet. But the Regia Marina had already adopted a fleet-in-being strategy before the war even started, staying in port to preserve ships Italy couldn't replace, rationing fuel it didn't have. Then came Taranto, the night of November 11th, 1940. 21 obsolete British biplanes launch from a single aircraft carrier and attack the Italian fleet in its home port. By morning, 3 Italian battleships are crippled. After that, the Italian Navy's defensive posture becomes complete paralysis. The fleet that was supposed to dominate the Mediterranean stays in port while Britain supplies Malta, reinforces Egypt, and controls the sea despite being outnumbered. And the equipment told the same story. Italian tanks were riveted, not welded. When hit by enemy fire, even if the armor held, the rivets would shear off inside the crew compartment, turning into shrapnel that killed the crew anyway. Italian soldiers sent to fight in Russia were issued cardboard boots that disintegrated in the snow. By September 1943, when Italy finally surrendered, it had been a burden on Germany for nearly the entire war. But what if it hadn't been? Let's rewind to June 1940 and change one variable. Mussolini is replaced by someone who understands logistics, coordination, and realistic goals. Not a genius, just competent. First, Greece is off the table. A competent Italian leadership recognizes that Greece is a distraction. The strategic prize isn't the Balkans, it's Egypt and the Suez Canal. Every resource, every division, every aircraft focuses on North Africa. Second, the invasion is coordinated. Instead of Graziani's timid 60-mile advance followed by paralysis, Italy attacks Egypt in September with proper logistics, air support, and German advisors helping plan the offensive. The British are still outnumbered, still reeling from Dunkirk, stretched thin across the entire Middle East, undersupplied and not expecting a competent Italian offensive. This time, Italy doesn't stop at Sidi Barrani. The advance continues. The key port of Mersa Matruh falls. Italian mechanized columns push toward Alexandria, and the British, outnumbered and outflanked, begin a fighting retreat. By November, Italian forces reach the outskirts of Cairo. By December 1940, they control the Suez Canal. This is the critical moment that changes everything. With Suez in Axis hands, Britain loses its primary route to India and the Far East. Ships have to sail around the southern tip of Africa, adding weeks to every supply run, multiplying costs, straining logistics to the breaking point. Oil from Iraq and Iran becomes nearly inaccessible. And now Malta becomes untenable. The Italian Navy, emboldened by success on land and coordinating with German U-boats and the Luftwaffe, engages the British Mediterranean fleet more aggressively. Malta, which historically served as a base for attacking Axis convoys, is now isolated. Without supply from Egypt, without air cover, without hope of relief, Malta cannot hold. By early 1941, Malta falls. The Mediterranean becomes an Axis-controlled sea. Now, this scenario assumes Italy either captures Tobruk's port facilities intact to expand supply capacity or receives German trucking support to bridge the logistical gap, both historically unlikely but necessary for this counterfactual to work. Even competence hits the hard ceiling of port capacity and desert logistics. But if we grant Italy that breakthrough, the question becomes, what does Germany do with this success? In our timeline, Germany invaded the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa was Hitler's ideological obsession, destroying what he called Judeo-Bolshevism and seizing Lebensraum in the East. But Barbarossa was also launched because the Battle of Britain had failed. Germany couldn't invade England, so Hitler convinced himself the Soviet Union would collapse in weeks and give him the victory he needed. In the competent Italy scenario, the strategic picture looks completely different by early 41. Britain has lost Egypt. The Suez Canal is in Axis hands. Malta has fallen. The Mediterranean fleet is retreating to Gibraltar. And now, India, the jewel of the British Empire, is accessible to Axis forces through the Middle East. Churchill is under immense political pressure. Some in his cabinet are quietly suggesting it might be time to negotiate. Hitler faces a choice: continue the Mediterranean strategy and finish Britain, or turn east and invade the Soviet Union as planned. Historically, German military leadership was divided on exactly this question. Grand Admiral Raeder, commander of the German Navy, argued passionately for what he called the Mediterranean strategy. Take Gibraltar and shut the Western Gate. Link up with Italian forces in Egypt. Push through Palestine and Iraq into Persia. Threaten the oil fields of the Middle East and the road to India. Force Britain to negotiate or collapse without ever needing to invade the British Isles. But General Franz Halder and the Army High Command wanted Barbarossa. They believed the Soviet Union was weak, poorly led, and could be defeated before winter. They saw the Mediterranean as a colonial sideshow. In our timeline, Hitler chose Barbarossa. But in the competent Italy scenario, the Mediterranean strategy isn't just a theory on paper, it's actually working. Italy has delivered a major strategic victory. The British Empire is fracturing. Success is tangible. So let's say Hitler delays Barbarossa. Not out of wisdom, but because success breeds caution, and Mussolini's competence has bought time and credibility for Rader's plan. Germany reinforces the Mediterranean instead of rescuing it. Rommel, instead of being sent to save a failing Italian offensive, is sent to exploit a successful one. German mechanized forces push through Egypt into Palestine, into Iraq, into Persia. By mid-41, Axis forces are threatening the oil fields of the Middle East. Churchill's options are running out. He faces a terrible choice. Fight on, alone, with dwindling resources and an empire under siege, or negotiate a peace that leaves the Axis controlling continental Europe and the Mediterranean. Does Britain negotiate? Maybe. Historically, Churchill refused to even consider peace terms. But if India is genuinely threatened, if the Suez is permanently lost, if the political pressure becomes unbearable, the calculation might change. Let's say Britain doesn't surrender outright, but agrees to a ceasefire in the Mediterranean, effectively recognizing Axis control of the region. That leaves Germany free to turn east in 1942. If Germany delays Barbarossa by a year, launching in June 42 instead of June 41, does it change the outcome? On the surface, delaying seems advantageous. More time to prepare, more resources, more strategic clarity. But there are problems. First, the Soviet Union is also preparing. In our timeline, Stalin was caught off guard in June 1941 despite dozens of warnings. The Red Army was in the middle of a massive reorganization and expansion. New tank corps forming, officers being promoted to replace those lost in the purges, doctrine being rewritten. By 1942, that reorganization is complete. More tanks, more aircraft, better trained divisions. And the purges of 37 are further in the past. Officers have gained experience, confidence, and tactical skill. Second, Lend-Lease begins earlier. Even if Britain negotiates a Mediterranean ceasefire, it continues supporting the Soviet Union as a bulwark against Germany. Churchill knows that if the USSR falls, Britain fights alone against the entire Axis. So American industrial aid starts flowing into the Soviet Union through Murmansk and Vladivostok, beginning in 1941. By the time Germany invades in 42, Soviet logistics are already being bolstered by American trucks, food, raw materials, and fuel. Third, Germany's delay doesn't mean it's stronger. The Wehrmacht is not significantly larger in 42 than it was in 41. German industrial production is still outpaced by Soviet output. And now, the German army is stretched across North Africa, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean, with significant forces tied down in occupation duties across a sprawling empire. So Barbarossa in 42 isn't easier for Germany. It's harder. The Soviet Union is more prepared, better supplied, and the Germans are more overstretched. The likely outcome? The same as our timeline. Initial German successes driven by superior tactics and operational skill, followed by overextension, brutal Soviet counterattacks, and eventual German defeat. But the war lasts longer and the casualties are even higher. There's another variable: Japan. In our timeline, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, bringing the United States into the war. In the competent Italy scenario, Japan faces a different strategic picture. If Britain has lost Suez and negotiated a Mediterranean ceasefire by mid-41, British forces in Asia are weaker. Singapore, Malaya, Burma, all more vulnerable than they were historically. Does Japan strike sooner, or does Japan, seeing Axis success in Europe, decide to invade the Soviet Union from the east instead of attacking the United States? Historically, Japan chose the southern strategy, attacking European colonies and the United States to seize oil and resources in Southeast Asia and the Dutch East Indies. But that decision was shaped by events in 1939. The Battle of Khalkhin Gol, where Soviet forces under Georgy Zhukov crushed the Japanese Sixth Army on the Mongolian border, discredited the northern strategy of expansion into Siberia. After that humiliating defeat, Japan signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union in April 1941 and honored it throughout the war. This had massive consequences. When Germany invaded Russia in June 1941, Japan didn't open a second front in the east. That allowed Stalin to transfer his veteran Siberian divisions to the defense of Moscow in December, a decisive factor in halting the German advance. In the competent Italy scenario, would Japan make a different calculation? Probably not. The trauma of Khalkhin Gol was too deep, and the Imperial Navy was committed to southward expansion for oil. Most likely, Japan still attacks Pearl Harbor in December 1941. And once the United States enters the war, the strategic balance shifts decisively. American industrial capacity is overwhelming. By 1943, the United States is producing more ships, planes, and tanks than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. A competent Italy delays the inevitable, but doesn't change it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Even a competent Italy has hard limits. Italy's industrial base in 1940 was a fraction of Britain's, let alone the United States. Italy produced 3,200 aircraft in 1940. Germany produced 10,800. The Soviet Union produced 10,500. Britain produced 15,000. The United States, not yet in the war, produced 6,000. By 1944, the United States alone was producing 96,000 aircraft per year. Italy's steel production, oil reserves, and manufacturing capacity were inadequate for a long war. A competent Italy could win battles, take territory, execute strategies, but it couldn't match the industrial output of its enemies. And there's a structural problem with authoritarian regimes. Mussolini's Italy, even in our competent scenario, still operates under a dictatorship that rewards loyalty over merit, suppresses dissent, and makes decisions based on ideology and ego. These systems have built-in inefficiencies. A truly competent Italy would require fundamental changes to the regime itself, at which point it might not invade anyone. We can imagine better Italian strategy, better logistics, smarter leadership, but we can't imagine an Italy that outproduces the combined industrial might of Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States. The Axis loses. The only question is how long it takes and how many people die. But there is one darker scenario. If Italy takes Suez by late 1940 and Britain negotiates a Mediterranean ceasefire in 1941, does the United States still enter the war when it did? In our timeline, the United States was already moving toward intervention. Lend-Lease to Britain, the Atlantic Charter, undeclared naval warfare with German U-boats in the Atlantic. But American public opinion was divided. If Britain appears to be stabilizing, if the Mediterranean is quiet, if Germany doesn't invade Russia until 1942, does the United States stay neutral longer? And if Japan attacks Pearl Harbor in December 1941, does Germany still declare war on the United States? Historically, Hitler's declaration of war on the United States 4 days after Pearl Harbor was a catastrophic strategic blunder. It allowed Roosevelt to prioritize the European theater and commit America's full industrial might against Germany first. In the competent Italy scenario, where Germany is consolidating Mediterranean gains instead of being bogged down in Russia, does Hitler make the same mistake? If Germany does not declare war and the United States focuses on Japan first, does the European war drag into 1945 or 46? This is the darkest possibility. A competent Italy extends the war, increases casualties, delays Allied victory without changing the outcome. But millions more people die, and the Holocaust continues longer. So, what if Italy had been a competent ally for Germany in World War II? The Mediterranean becomes an Axis lake. Britain loses Egypt, Suez, Malta, possibly negotiates a ceasefire. Germany delays Barbarossa but invades a better prepared Soviet Union in 1942. Japan might strike sooner or coordinate against the USSR. The United States still enters and still brings overwhelming industrial power, and the Axis still loses, just later at higher cost. But here's the lesson. Italy's incompetence wasn't accidental. It was structural. Mussolini prioritized loyalty over ability, propaganda over planning, personal glory over strategic coherence. He invaded Greece to prove he didn't need Germany's help. He kept failed generals in command because they were loyal fascists. He ignored logistics, intelligence, and the limits of Italian industrial capacity. Authoritarian regimes are bad at war because they're bad at competence. They can't tolerate dissent, can't reward merit, can't adapt when reality contradicts ideology. Italy wasn't incompetent by chance. It was incompetent by design. And no counterfactual can fix that without dismantling the regime itself. Could Italy have been more effective? Yes. Would it have changed the outcome? No. But it might have made the nightmare last longer. What do you think? Could a competent Italian strategy have forced Britain to negotiate, or was the Axis always doomed once the United States entered? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you want more counterfactual analysis of World War II, hit subscribe. Thanks for watching.